Chioma stared at the sea of boys around her, all chattering, laughing, some pushing each other as they unloaded from their parents' cars. She was the only girl in sight. Maybe it's just the first day. Maybe the girls haven't arrived yet, she muttered under her breath, gripping the handle of her suitcase tightly. But as she stood outside the big iron gates of St. Augustine Boys' Boarding School, a sinking feeling twisted in her stomach. Chioma's eyes scanned the gate. Right there, in big gold letters, "For boys only," she felt a cold shiver run down her spine. No one had mentioned anything about this school being only for boys. Not once. Not when her parents had rushed through the paperwork or packed her things. They'd been so caught up in their usual arguments that they barely noticed her cries of protest. She tried to speak up then, but she was used to them ignoring her. But she hadn't expected them to ignore something this serious. This is a mistake, she whispered. They've made a huge mistake. Her heart was pounding. She wanted to turn around and run back to the car, but it was too late. Her dad's car was already speeding out of the gate, leaving her standing there with her suitcase, surrounded by boys. For a few seconds, she stood there, frozen. What was she supposed to do? Her parents had already paid the fees, and here she was, with nowhere else to go. She swallowed, her eyes stinging. She wanted to scream, to call her mom, to make them come back and fix this. But she knew that wasn't going to happen. Her parents barely had time for her on a good day, and this would just be another little thing they'd expect her to handle on her own. So, taking a shaky breath, she forced herself to move forward. She kept her head down, pulling her suitcase with trembling hands as she walked toward the dorm building. Inside, it was just as chaotic. Boys ran up and down the hallway, shouting and laughing. Bags were thrown around, clothes were everywhere, and the noise was nearly deafening. She felt like a tiny fish in a giant pond of sharks. She tried to keep her head down and blend in, even though she knew it was impossible. She felt like everyone was staring at her, though no one seemed to notice that she was, in fact, a girl. Finally, she found her dorm room, room 17. Her parents hadn't even told her if she'd have a roommate, but she'd soon find out. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door. Inside, the room was small but clean. There were 2 single beds, a closet, and a small window with a view of the school's dusty football field. On one bed, a thin boy with big glasses and neatly combed hair was already unpacking his things. He looked up as she entered, giving her a quick, curious glance. "Hi," he said, straightening up and adjusting his glasses. "I'm Kunnel. You must be Chioma?" He sounded uncertain, but she nodded quickly. "Yeah, that's me," she mumbled, her voice barely above a whisper. She suddenly felt self-conscious about her voice. She tried to make it sound deeper, but it just sounded like she was forcing it. Kunnel looked at her a little strangely but didn't say anything. He simply nodded and went back to unpacking. Chioma let out a small sigh of relief and walked over to the other bed. As she sat down, she could feel Kunnel watching her from the corner of his eye, probably sensing that something was off. But he didn't ask any questions, and for now that was enough. As the hours passed, Chioma felt herself getting more and more tense. She wanted to call her parents, but every time she tried to sneak away to find a phone, she was stopped by someone shouting orders, or by a teacher leading them to another part of the school for orientation. The day went by in a blur, and before she knew it, it was evening. In the dining hall, the noise was even louder than before. Boys were talking over each other, laughing, joking, and grabbing food from the large metal trays lined up in the center of the hall. Chioma picked at her food, trying to stay as quiet as possible. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was going to notice she didn't belong here. Her heart beat faster every time someone looked her way. "Are you okay?" Kunnel asked suddenly, snapping her out of her thoughts. Chioma looked up, startled. Yeah, I'm fine. You don't talk much, do you?" he asked, watching her with a curious look. She shrugged, trying to come up with an excuse. "I'm just, not used to this place yet." Kunnel nodded slowly, but his gaze lingered a little longer. "It's okay. Boarding school can be strange at first. My older brother told me it took him weeks to get used to it." Chioma forced a small smile, hoping he'd leave it at that. But as she looked around the hall, her eyes landed on a tall, muscular boy near the corner of the room. He was laughing loudly, surrounded by a group of smaller boys who were clearly trying to keep him happy. Chioma watched as he pushed one of the boys, causing his tray to tip and spill his food all over the floor. The boy looked terrified, but he forced a laugh, probably just to avoid getting into trouble with him. "Who's that?" Chioma whispered, nodding toward the boy. Kunal followed her gaze and grimaced. "That's Musa, the school bully. He's been here for 2 years already, so he thinks he owns the place. Don't get on his bad side. Just stay out of his way." Chioma nodded, swallowing hard. She didn't need any more trouble. She already had her hands full trying to keep her secret. That night, Chioma lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling. Her mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. How long could she keep this up? How long before someone found out the truth? She couldn't stay here. She had to find a way to contact her parents, to make them understand that this was a terrible mistake. She couldn't imagine spending weeks, maybe months, pretending to be someone she wasn't. But as the days went by, each time she tried to slip away to find a phone or talk to a teacher, she chickened out at the last moment. The thought of explaining herself, of admitting she didn't belong, terrified her. What if they laughed at her? Or worse, what if they sent her back to her parents, only for her parents to send her right back here? They'd think she was just being dramatic, as they always did. She thought about confiding in Kunal, but she wasn't sure if he could be trusted. What if he told someone else? No, she couldn't risk it. She'd just have to keep going, keep her head down, and hope her parents realized their mistake on their own. After nearly a week of trying to stay invisible, Chioma found herself falling into a sort of routine. She went to classes, kept her head down, and tried to avoid drawing any attention to herself. Kunal was the only one she talked to, and even then, she kept her answers short. The other boys seemed too busy with their own lives to notice her. But it wasn't long before her luck ran out. One afternoon, as she was leaving the dining hall, she accidentally bumped into someone. She looked up, and her heart sank. It was Musa, the bully Kunal had warned her about. He glared down at her, his eyes narrowing. "Watch where you're going, shrimp," he sneered. "Sorry," she stammered, stepping back quickly. Musa looked her up and down, a smirk playing on his lips. "You're new here, aren't you?" Chioma nodded, trying to keep her voice steady. "Yes." Musa leaned in, his voice low and menacing. "You'd better learn the rules around here, new kid. I don't like it when people step on my toes. Got it?" She nodded again, feeling a cold sweat break out on her forehead. "Got it," he chuckled, patting her on the shoulder, but it felt more like a shove. "Good. I'd hate to see you get into trouble." With that, he walked away, leaving Chioma standing there, her heart racing. She felt sick. She didn't know how much longer she could keep this up. Every day was like walking on a tightrope, and one wrong step could send her crashing down. That night, as she lay in bed, she couldn't hold it in any longer. She sat up, glancing over at Kunal, who was reading a book by the dim light of his lamp. "Kunal," she whispered. He looked up, surprised. "Yeah." She hesitated, her heart pounding. But she had to tell someone. She couldn't keep it bottled up any longer. I don't belong here," she said, her voice barely audible. Kunal frowned, closing his book. "What do you mean?" Chioma took a deep breath, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. This is all a mistake. My parents, they weren't paying attention. They put me in the wrong school. I'm not supposed to be here. I'm a girl." Kunal's eyes widened, and for a moment, he just stared at her, his mouth open in shock. She braced herself, waiting for him to laugh or shout or run out of the room to tell someone. But instead, he closed his mouth, his expression softening. "Wow," he whispered. That explains a lot." Chioma blinked, surprised. You believe me?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah. I mean, I thought something was off. You were so quiet. I knew you were hiding something, but I didn't think it was this." Chioma felt a wave of relief wash over her. For the first time since she arrived, she didn't feel completely alone. But What are you going to do? Kunnel asked, his voice filled with concern. Chioma shook her head, her heart sinking. I don't know. I've been trying to call my parents, but I can't get through to them, and I'm too scared to tell any of the teachers. I don't know what they'll do to me. Kunnel was silent for a moment, thinking, maybe I can help. I know where the office phone is. I can keep watch while you make a call. Chioma's eyes filled with gratitude. Really? You'd do that for me? Kunnel nodded, giving her a small smile. Yeah. I mean, we're roommates, right? We have to look out for each other. Chioma felt a lump in her throat. For the first time, she felt a spark of hope. Maybe, with Kunnel's help, she could finally find a way out of this mess. The next morning, Chioma felt a strange mixture of relief and anxiety as she woke up. The relief came from knowing that she'd finally told someone her secret, and that Kunnel hadn't freaked out or betrayed her trust. But the anxiety, that was there, stronger than ever. Her problems hadn't disappeared overnight. If anything, her worry had grown. Kunnel might know, but now she had to trust him to keep quiet. And with Musa lurking around, always looking for someone to pick on, she knew the stakes were high. As she hurriedly dressed in her oversized uniform, she noticed Kunnel watching her. He gave her a reassuring nod, as if to say he had her back. Chioma took a deep breath and nodded back. It was comforting, even if just a little. That morning, they went down to breakfast together. The dining hall was as noisy as ever, but this time, Chioma felt the pressure to act just like everyone else. She needed to seem like just another boy, to keep up the illusion she'd crafted, even though she felt awkward and out of place. Just follow my lead, Kunnel whispered as they took their seats. Chioma tried to relax and watch the other boys, hoping to mimic the way they behaved. Kunnel dug into his food with gusto, while Chioma picked at hers, trying not to draw attention to herself. She felt a pang of jealousy watching how easily Kunnel blended in, laughing and joking with the other boys nearby. Suddenly, Musa's loud laughter echoed across the hall, and Chioma froze. He was walking around, looking for trouble as usual. She prayed he wouldn't come her way. She held her breath as he sauntered past their table, throwing them a quick, searching glance before moving on. Her shoulders relaxed, but only a little. She knew he wasn't the type to let things go so easily. After breakfast, they headed to class and Kunnel whispered, "Let's try to get to the office during lunch. That'll be the best time to use the phone without getting caught." Chioma nodded, grateful but still nervous. She knew this could be her only chance to contact her parents. Class was a whirlwind. Chioma was used to school, of course, but St. Augustine's was different. The teachers were stricter, and the boys had a rougher way of speaking, calling each other names that Chioma couldn't imagine saying herself. As she scribbled notes, she felt eyes on her from time to time, and she wondered if she was being too quiet or too shy. She couldn't afford to draw attention, but blending in felt like an impossible task. As they walked out of the classroom, Kunnel gave her an encouraging nudge. "You're doing fine. Just stay cool." But when lunch came around, Chioma's nerves kicked in all over again. She could feel her heart racing as she and Kunnel snuck out of the crowded dining hall and headed towards the administrative building where the office was located. Kunnel walked in front, peeking around the corner every few steps to make sure no teachers or prefects were nearby. They stopped just outside the office, where a small old-fashioned phone sat on a desk by the door. Kunnel nodded, giving her a quick thumbs up. Chioma took a deep breath, grabbed the receiver, and quickly dialed her home number. The phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Come on, she whispered, biting her lip. Finally, someone picked up. "Hello." It was her mother's voice. Chioma's heart jumped in relief, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Mama, it's me," she said quickly, keeping her voice low. "Oh, Chioma, how are you doing at your new school? Is everything okay?" her mother asked, sounding distant, almost distracted. Chioma swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around the receiver. "Mama, there's been a mistake. This school, it's only for boys. You sent me to a boys' school by accident." Her mother laughed, a light, almost careless sound. "Oh, Chioma, don't be silly. It's just nerves from being in a new place. I'm sure it's fine. Chioma's heart sank. Mama, please, you have to believe me. I'm the only girl here. I don't belong. But before she could finish, a hand suddenly yanked the phone from her grasp. Chioma spun around, her stomach dropping. Standing there, smirking, was Musa. Well, what do we have here? He sneered, holding the receiver up to his ear mockingly. Calling home, are we? Chioma's face went pale, and she could feel her hands shaking. Give it back, Musa, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Oh, I don't think so, he replied, hanging up the phone and crossing his arms. What's this? The new kid can't handle boarding school? Or is it something else? Kunal, standing beside Chioma, tried to step in. Leave him alone, Musa. It's none of your business. Musa's eyes narrowed, his smirk widening. Oh, I think it is my business. Something's not right about you, he said, pointing at Chioma. I can smell it. Chioma's heart pounded. She didn't know what to say. She could see Kunal clenching his fists, clearly wanting to defend her, but knowing that any move against Musa could backfire. They were outmatched. With one last sneering look, Musa leaned in close, whispering so only Chioma could hear. I'll find out your secret, and when I do, you'll wish you'd never come to this school. Then he turned and walked away, leaving Chioma and Kunal standing there, stunned. Chioma's legs felt weak, and she had to lean against the wall to steady herself. The fear that had been growing inside her was now 10 times worse. Kunal put a hand on her shoulder, his face grim. We need to be careful. Musa won't give up. He's dangerous. Chioma nodded, swallowing hard. She felt trapped. No one was going to believe her. And now, she had the school's biggest bully breathing down her neck. She didn't know how much longer she could keep this up. Over the next few days, Chioma did everything she could to avoid Musa. She kept to herself during classes, stayed close to Kunal during meals, and did her best to keep a low profile. But Musa's words haunted her, and every time she saw him, her heart raced with fear. He was always watching, always smirking, like he knew something no one else did. One afternoon, during a free period, Kunal suggested they go to the library to study. Chioma agreed, grateful for any chance to escape Musa's gaze. The library was quiet, with only a few other boys scattered around, buried in books. She relaxed a little, letting herself enjoy the silence. As she and Kunal settled into a corner with their books, Kunal looked over at her, his expression serious. Chioma, we need a plan, he said in a low voice. She sighed, running a hand through her hair. I know, but what can we do? Musa's already suspicious, and my parents won't listen. They think I'm just nervous about being in a new place. Kunal thought for a moment, his brows furrowed. Maybe if we could get proof. Something to show your parents that you're really here, surrounded by boys. Then they'd have to believe you. Chioma's eyes lit up. That's a good idea, but how do we get proof? Kunal looked around, his eyes landing on the old camera hanging by the librarian's desk. If we could get a photo, maybe send it home somehow. Chioma nodded, hope blossoming in her chest. Yes, if they see me with the boys, they'd realize the mistake. But before she could get too excited, a shadow fell across the table. Chioma's heart dropped. She didn't need to look up to know who it was. Planning something, are we? Musa's voice was cold and mocking. Chioma's throat went dry. And no, we're just studying, she stammered, trying to hide her fear. Musa leaned in, his face inches from hers. You think you're smart, don't you? But I see right through you. He looked her up and down, his eyes glinting with suspicion. I know you're hiding something, and it's only a matter of time before I find out what it is. Chioma clenched her fists, struggling to keep her composure. She wanted to tell him to leave her alone, to go away, but fear held her tongue. Kunal stepped in, his voice firm. Leave us alone, Musa. We're just trying to study. Musa sneered, giving Kunal a hard shove. Stay out of this, Kunal. Unless you want to be on my bad side too. Kunal stumbled back, but he didn't back down. He stepped closer to Chioma, standing protectively by her side. Chioma felt a surge of gratitude and strength seeing Kunnal's loyalty. Musa looked at them both, his face twisting with anger. Fine, but I'll be watching you. Both of you. With that, he stormed off, leaving a trail of silence in his wake. Chioma let out a shaky breath, her hands trembling. Thank you, Kunnal, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Kunnal gave her a small, reassuring smile. Don't worry, Chioma. We'll figure this out. The days passed, each one filled with tension and worry. Chioma and Kunnal managed to snap a photo in the dormitory when no one was looking, and Chioma planned to slip it into an envelope and send it home. But every time she thought about mailing it, she hesitated, worried that someone might intercept it, or worse, that her parents might still not take her seriously. Meanwhile, Musa's presence lingered like a dark cloud. He seemed to pop up everywhere Chioma went, always watching, always waiting. Chioma could feel the walls closing in, and her patience was running thin. She was tired of hiding, tired of pretending. But every time she thought about standing up to Musa, fear held her back. One evening, as she lay in bed, she thought about all the girls in her old school, the friends she'd had, the laughter and warmth she missed so much. She felt like a stranger in her own life, surrounded by boys who would never understand what she was going through. Tears pricked her eyes, and she quickly wiped them away, not wanting Kunnal to see her crying. But Kunnal noticed. Chioma, he whispered, his voice soft. You're stronger than you think. I know this isn't easy, but you're handling it better than most people would. His words warmed her heart, and for the first time, she allowed herself a small smile. Maybe she was stronger than she gave herself credit for. Maybe, with Kunnal's help, she could find a way out of this mess. But deep down, Chioma knew that things would only get harder from here. Musa was still out there, waiting for her to slip up, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And as much as she wanted to believe she could handle it, she couldn't shake the feeling that her secret wouldn't stay safe for long. In the dim light of the dormitory, Chioma made a silent promise to herself. No matter what happened, no matter how hard things got, she wouldn't let Musa, or anyone else, define her story. She would find her way out of this, and she would do it on her own terms. A few weeks had passed since Chioma's failed phone call to her mother, but the memory still burned fresh in her mind. Each day since then, she had walked through St. Augustine's boys' boarding school with her heart pounding, half expecting Musa to corner her and reveal her secret to everyone. Every time she saw him, smirking and watching her from a distance, her stomach twisted in knots. He hadn't said anything yet, but Chioma knew he was just waiting for the right moment. But she also knew she couldn't stay scared forever. If she kept hiding, Musa would sense her fear and use it against her. So, she tried to keep a low profile and blend in with the other boys as best as she could, even though she knew that Musa's suspicions were only growing. One morning, as Chioma and Kunnal were getting ready for class, Kunnal looked over at her with a serious expression. Chioma, we can't keep living in fear of Musa, he said, whispering so no one else in the dorm could overhear. Chioma pulled on her oversized school sweater and sighed. I know, Kunnal, but what are we supposed to do? If I try to stand up to him, he'll just make things worse. He already suspects something. Kunnal shook his head. That's the problem. He's feeding off your fear. If you show him you're not scared, he might leave you alone. Chioma swallowed. The idea of standing up to Musa made her feel queasy, but she trusted Kunnal's instincts. He had been at St. Augustine's longer than she had, and he knew Musa's type better than she did. Maybe it was worth a try. Okay, she whispered, her voice barely audible. But what if he doesn't back down? Kunnal hesitated, then nodded thoughtfully. If he doesn't back down, we'll be ready. Just remember that you're not alone in this. We're in this together. Chioma took a deep breath, steeling herself for the day ahead. The first test of her courage came during lunch that same day. Chioma and Kunnal were sitting in the dining hall, eating in silence, when Musa and his friends walked in, taking their usual spot near the back of the hall. Chioma's grip tightened on her spoon as she saw Musa's gaze flick toward her. She felt her face heat up, but she reminded herself of Kunnal's advice. Don't show fear. As if reading her mind, Kunal gave her a slight nod, encouraging her to stay calm. But Musa wasn't about to leave her alone that easily. After a few minutes, he swaggered over to their table, his smirk wider than ever. "Well, if it isn't the quiet little mouse," he sneered, looking straight at Chioma. Chioma held her breath, forcing herself to meet his gaze without flinching. "What do you want, Musa?" Musa's eyebrows shot up in mock surprise. "Oh, so the mouse can talk. I thought you'd be too scared to even look at me." His eyes glittered with a dangerous curiosity. "You're hiding something, aren't you?" Kunal jumped in, his tone firm. "Leave him alone, Musa. He hasn't done anything to you." Musa ignored him, his gaze fixed on Chioma. "You know, I could find out everything about you with one little question to the headmaster. All it would take is a quick visit to the office." Chioma's heart skipped a beat, but she forced herself to keep her expression steady. "Why do you even care, Musa? There's nothing for you to find out." Musa chuckled, crossing his arms. "We'll see about that." Then, to Chioma's surprise, he leaned in close and whispered in her ear, "I know you're different, and I'll prove it." Chioma's breath hitched, but she kept her gaze steady, refusing to let him see her fear. After a moment, Musa straightened up and gave her one last smirk before walking away. She let out a shaky breath, feeling Kunal's reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You did great, Chioma," he whispered. "Just keep holding your ground." Chioma nodded, though her mind was still racing. Musa's words haunted her, but for the first time, she felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe if she kept standing up to him, he'd eventually lose interest. Later that evening, Chioma and Kunal were studying in their dorm room when the door burst open. Musa's friend, a scrawny boy named Ahmed, barged in, looking smug. "Musa wants to see you," he sneered, pointing directly at Chioma. Chioma's heart pounded. She glanced at Kunal, who gave her a reassuring nod. "It's okay," Kunal said quietly. "We'll face him together." With that, they followed Ahmed down the corridor to an empty classroom, where Musa was waiting. He was leaning against a desk, his arms crossed and a smug look on his face. "Thought you could get away from me, huh?" Musa said, his voice dripping with arrogance. Chioma crossed her arms, trying to look braver than she felt. "What do you want, Musa?" Musa smirked, eyeing her up and down. "I want to know your secret. Everyone's got one, and I think you're hiding something big." Chioma felt her heart race, but she forced herself to stay calm. "You're imagining things, Musa. Just leave me alone." Musa laughed, a dark, mocking sound. "Oh, you're good, but I'm better. You can't fool me." Then he took a step closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "And when I find out what you're hiding, I'm going to make sure everyone knows." Chioma clenched her fists, fighting the urge to scream. She could feel Kunal tense beside her, ready to step in if Musa went too far. But before Musa could say anything else, there was a sudden noise in the hallway. Footsteps. They all froze, and Chioma's heart skipped a beat as the headmaster's voice echoed down the corridor. "What's going on in here?" Musa's smirk vanished, replaced by a look of panic. He quickly backed away from Chioma, trying to look innocent as the headmaster entered the room. The headmaster's sharp eyes scanned the scene, taking in the tense standoff. "Musa, Ahmed, what are you doing in here after hours? You know this classroom is off limits." Musa forced a fake smile. "We were just talking, sir. Nothing wrong with that." The headmaster raised an eyebrow, clearly not convinced. He glanced at Chioma and Kunal, his expression softening slightly. "Is that true?" Kunal quickly nodded. "Yes, sir. We were just about to head back to our dorms." The headmaster sighed, giving them all a stern look. "I don't want to see any of you here again after hours. If I do, there will be consequences." Musa muttered a quick apology, and with one last glare at Chioma, he stormed out of the room, followed by Ahmed. Chioma let out a sigh of relief, feeling Kunal's hand on her shoulder. "You handled that really well," he whispered as they walked back to their dorm. Chioma nodded, though her mind was still racing. She knew that Musa wasn't going to give up, but at least for now she was safe. The following days were a blur of tension and whispered threats. Musa continued to lurk around every corner, always watching, always waiting. Chioma could feel his eyes on her during every class, every meal, and every free period. She could barely concentrate, her mind constantly racing with thoughts of what Musa might do next. But despite the fear, Chioma felt a new resolve growing within her. She was tired of running, tired of hiding. She wanted to be able to live without constantly looking over her shoulder. One afternoon, as she was walking back to her dorm after class, she saw Musa waiting by the entrance, a smirk on his face. "Back for more?" he sneered, blocking her path. Chioma took a deep breath, standing her ground. "What do you want, Musa?" Musa's smirk widened. "I want you to admit that you're hiding something. It's obvious. Just tell me the truth, and maybe I'll go easy on you." Chioma's hands clenched into fists. She could feel Kunnel's presence behind her, ready to jump in if needed. But something inside her snapped. She was tired of Musa's games, tired of living in fear. "I don't owe you anything, Musa," she said, her voice steady. "I don't know why you're so obsessed with me, but I'm not going to play your game. So just leave me alone." Musa's smirk faltered, surprise flickering in his eyes. But he quickly recovered, his expression hardening. "You think you're so tough," he sneered, "but you're just a scared little kid. And when I finally uncover your secret, you'll regret ever coming here." With that, he stormed off, leaving Chioma standing there, her heart pounding. She could feel Kunnel's hand on her shoulder, steadying her. "You did great, Chioma," he whispered. "You're braver than you think." Chioma took a shaky breath, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. She knew the battle wasn't over, but for the first time, she felt like she had some control. She had stood up to Musa, and she wasn't going to let him intimidate her anymore. That evening, Chioma and Kunnel sat in their dorm room, talking quietly about their next move. They knew that Musa wouldn't give up, but they were determined to find a way to keep him at bay. "Maybe we can find a way to get proof of his bullying," Kunnel suggested. "If we can show the teachers what he's been doing, they might put a stop to it." Chioma nodded, feeling a spark of hope. "Yes, that could work. If we can gather enough evidence, they won't be able to ignore it." They spent the rest of the evening brainstorming, coming up with a plan to document Musa's behavior. They knew it wouldn't be easy, but they were determined to see it through. As they settled into bed that night, Chioma felt a sense of relief. She still had a long way to go, but with Kunnel by her side, she knew she could face whatever challenges lay ahead. And for the first time since arriving at St. Augustine's, she felt like she was taking control of her own story. The battle with Musa was far from over, but Chioma was ready to fight. The next morning, Chioma woke up feeling more determined than she had in weeks. She and Kunnel had a plan: gather enough evidence to prove that Musa was a bully. They hoped this would get the teachers to intervene and stop Musa from harassing her. But now, with a goal in sight, the real challenge lay ahead: actually catching Musa in the act without getting caught themselves. Kunnel was quiet as they walked to the dining hall for breakfast, clearly deep in thought. When they sat down, he leaned over to Chioma and whispered, "I have my old phone with me. It doesn't have a SIM card, but it can record videos." Chioma's eyes widened. "Are you sure? That could work." Kunnel nodded, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "But we have to be careful. If Musa finds out we're recording him, he'll get even worse." Chioma took a deep breath and nodded. "We'll be careful. Promise." Later that day, they got their first opportunity to put their plan into action. During a break between classes, they heard a commotion near the football field. Chioma and Kunnel exchanged a quick glance, and Kunnel slipped his phone out of his bag, holding it low as they approached. They spotted Musa near the field, shoving a smaller boy, Ahmed, one of his usual followers. Chioma felt a pang of sympathy as she watched Ahmed stumble, struggling to keep his balance. It looked like even Musa's friends weren't safe from his bullying. Kunnel pressed the record button and held the phone steady, keeping it out of sight as they watched Musa sneer down at Ahmed. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" Musa taunted, his voice dripping with menace. "But you're nothing without me. If I didn't let you hang around, you'd have nobody." Ahmed looked terrified but nodded quickly, forcing a weak laugh as he tried to play along. Chioma could see the fear in his eyes, though, and it made her stomach turn. "Let that be a lesson," Musa said, giving Ahmed one last shove before stalking off. As soon as Musa was out of sight, Kunal stopped recording and tucked the phone away. "That should be good enough to show the teachers, right?" Chioma nodded, feeling a surge of hope. "It's a start. But I think we'll need more if we want the teachers to take us seriously." Kunal agreed, and they spent the rest of the day staying close to Musa, watching him and trying to record any moments of his bullying. They managed to get a few more clips, each one showing Musa taunting, pushing, or threatening someone. Chioma felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and fear as they gathered evidence. She knew they were getting closer to their goal, but each time they caught Musa in the act, she couldn't shake the feeling that he was somehow aware of their presence. By the end of the week, they had several videos saved on Kunal's phone. The evidence was strong, and they both agreed it was time to take it to one of the teachers. But that night, as they reviewed the videos in their dorm room, a loud knock on the door made them both jump. Kunal quickly turned off the phone, and Chioma tucked it under her pillow just as the door swung open. Musa strode in, his eyes cold and calculating as he looked from Chioma to Kunal. "Thought you two were getting smart, didn't you?" he sneered, his gaze narrowing. Chioma's heart raced. "What do you want, Musa?" "Oh, I don't want anything," he said, crossing his arms. "But I think you two do. I've seen you following me, whispering, thinking you're so clever. Did you think I wouldn't notice?" Kunal tried to keep his voice steady. "We're just trying to avoid trouble, Musa. You're the one who's been threatening us." Musa smirked, leaning closer. "Oh, I know you're up to something. And if I find out you're planning anything against me, you'll regret it." Chioma forced herself to meet his gaze. "You don't scare us, Musa." Musa's smirk faded, replaced by a look of cold fury. "You should be scared, Chioma," he whispered, his voice dripping with menace. "Because if you push me too far, I'll make sure you regret ever stepping foot in this school." With that, he turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Chioma let out a shaky breath, her hands trembling as she turned to Kunal. "We have to show the teachers this evidence tomorrow," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "If we wait any longer, he'll find a way to get to us." Kunal nodded, his expression grim. "Agreed. Let's go first thing in the morning." The next day, they waited until breakfast was over before sneaking off to the teacher's lounge, where they found Mr. Alade, one of the kinder teachers who sometimes helped students with their personal issues. Chioma's heart pounded as they approached him, and she hoped he would take them seriously. "Mr. Alade, can we speak with you?" Kunal asked, his voice polite but urgent. Mr. Alade looked up, surprised. "Of course. Is everything all right?" Chioma took a deep breath. "We have something to show you. It's about Musa." Mr. Alade's expression grew serious. "Musa? What has he done?" Kunal pulled out his phone and opened the videos, showing Mr. Alade each clip in turn. As the teacher watched, his face darkened, his eyes narrowing with disapproval. "This is unacceptable behavior," he muttered, his voice filled with anger. "Bullying has no place in this school." Chioma felt a surge of hope. "So you'll do something about it?" Mr. Alade nodded firmly. "Yes, I'll speak to the headmaster about this. Musa needs to learn that his actions have consequences." He promised them that he would handle the situation and that they wouldn't need to worry about Musa any longer. Chioma and Kunal left the teacher's lounge with a renewed sense of relief, feeling like a huge weight had been lifted off their shoulders. But that afternoon, things took a dark turn. As Chioma and Kunal returned to their dorm after class, they found their room in chaos. Clothes were strewn across the floor, their bags had been opened, and their books lay scattered everywhere. Chioma's heart skipped a beat as she realized what had happened. "Kunal, do you think Musa did this?" Kunal's face was pale as he surveyed the mess. "I don't know who else it could be." They spent the next hour cleaning up the room, their minds racing with fear and anger. If Musa was willing to go this far, who knew what he might do next? Chioma felt her hands trembling as she folded her clothes, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread in her stomach. Then, as they were finishing up, Kunal's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and frowned. "It's from an unknown number," he said, showing Chioma the message. The text read, "You think you're smart? This is just the beginning. Watch your back." Chioma felt a cold chill run down her spine. Musa was escalating his threats, and she didn't know how much longer they could handle it. The next day, Chioma and Kunal anxiously awaited the news from Mr. Alade, hoping he would have taken action against Musa by now. But as they walked into the dining hall for breakfast, they spotted Musa, sitting comfortably with his friends, smirking at them as if nothing had happened. Chioma felt a pang of fear. Hadn't Mr. Alade done anything? She and Kunal exchanged worried glances, but they forced themselves to sit down and eat, pretending not to notice Musa's taunting stares. After breakfast, they finally ran into Mr. Alade in the hallway. Chioma hurried over to him, her voice filled with urgency. "Mr. Alade, did you speak to the headmaster? Did you do anything about Musa?" Mr. Alade sighed, his expression sympathetic but resigned. "I spoke to the headmaster, but he insisted on giving Musa another chance. He said that the school values rehabilitation over punishment and that they want to help him change." Chioma's heart sank. "But he's not going to stop. He already broke into our room and threatened us." Mr. Alade shook his head, looking genuinely regretful. "I'm sorry, Chioma. I did my best, but the headmaster has the final say. I'll keep an eye on Musa, but for now, there's nothing more I can do." Chioma and Kunal exchanged a look of despair. They had risked so much to gather evidence, only for it to be dismissed. Felt like a slap in the face. As they walked back to class, Chioma felt a mixture of anger and frustration boiling inside her. She had tried everything to stand up for herself, to do the right thing, and yet it felt like the system was stacked against her. Kunal put a comforting hand on her shoulder. "We'll figure something out, Chioma. We're not giving up." But Chioma's faith was starting to waver. She had tried so hard to stay brave, but now, the weight of her secret and the constant threat of Musa felt overwhelming. Over the next few days, Musa continued to make their lives miserable. He would show up unexpectedly, making snide comments, shoving them in the hallway, and leaving cruel notes in their lockers. Chioma felt like she was constantly looking over her shoulder, unable to find a moment of peace. One afternoon, as they were sitting in the library, Kunal leaned over and whispered, "I think we need a new plan." Chioma looked at him, exhausted. "What more can we do?" Kunal hesitated, then said, "Maybe we don't need to rely on the teachers. Maybe we can stand up to Musa ourselves. He's only a bully because he thinks he's untouchable." Chioma thought about it, a spark of determination flickering in her chest. She had spent so long trying to hide, to avoid confrontation, but maybe Kunal was right. Maybe it was time to show Musa that she wasn't afraid of him. "What if we confronted him in front of everyone?" she suggested. "If we called him out, made him see that we're not scared, maybe he'd back down." Kunal smiled, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "That's exactly what I was thinking." They spent the rest of the afternoon planning their confrontation, deciding to wait until the next morning, when everyone would be gathered in the dining hall for breakfast. Chioma felt a mixture of fear and anticipation, but she knew this was her chance to take back control of her life. The next morning, Chioma and Kunal walked into the dining hall, their hearts pounding with adrenaline. They spotted Musa sitting at his usual table, surrounded by his friends, laughing and joking as if he didn't have a care in the world. Chioma took a deep breath and marched over to him, with Kunal by her side. The entire dining hall went silent as they approached, everyone watching in surprise. "Musa," Chioma said, her voice steady. "We need to talk." Musa looked up, his smirk fading as he saw the determination in her eyes. "Oh, and what do you think you're doing, new kid?" Chioma met his gaze without flinching. "I'm tired of you bullying everyone. We all are. You think you're untouchable, but you're just a coward hiding behind threats." A murmur ran through the dining hall as everyone watched the confrontation, stunned by Chioma's bravery. Musa's face turned red, and he stood up, towering over her. "You think you can talk to me like that?" he snarled. "Do you know who you're dealing with?" "Yes," Chioma replied, her voice strong. I'm dealing with a bully, and I'm not scared of you anymore." The other boys watched, some of them nodding in agreement, and Chioma felt a surge of strength. Musa's power had always come from fear, but now that she was standing up to him, she could see the doubt flickering in his eyes. Kunal stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "You're finished, Musa. We're not going to let you keep bullying us. It ends here." For a moment, Musa looked like he might lash out, but as he glanced around the room, he saw the other boys watching, some of them nodding in support of Chioma and Kunal. Realizing he was outnumbered, he clenched his fists, his face twisted with rage. "You're all pathetic," he spat, before storming out of the dining hall, leaving behind a stunned silence. As he disappeared, a wave of relief washed over Chioma. She knew the battle wasn't entirely over, but she had taken a stand, and that was enough. The dining hall erupted in whispers and murmurs, but Chioma barely heard them. She felt lighter, freer, as if a huge weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Kunal grinned at her, his eyes filled with pride. "You did it, Chioma. You really did it." Chioma smiled, feeling a sense of accomplishment and courage she hadn't felt before. She had faced her biggest fear, and though she knew challenges would still come, she was no longer the scared, hidden girl she had once been. For the first time since arriving at St. Augustine's, Chioma felt a true sense of peace. She and Kunal had finally stood up to Musa in front of the entire dining hall, stripping him of the power he had held over them for so long. Musa had stormed out, humiliated and furious, but since that day, he had kept his distance. Chioma began to hope that maybe, just maybe, her ordeal was finally over. The other boys, too, had been surprisingly supportive. Some of them approached her and Kunal afterward, murmuring thanks and expressing relief that Musa's bullying had finally been exposed. A few even invited them to join their study groups or offered to sit with them at meals. For the first time, Chioma didn't feel like an outsider. However, she hadn't forgotten her reason for being here. She still needed to contact her parents and get out of this boys' school. She couldn't hide her true identity forever. And as much as she had found support in Kunal, the longer she stayed, the greater the risk of someone finding out her secret. One rainy afternoon, while most of the boys were indoors, Kunal suggested they try calling her parents again. They had kept their distance from the office phone since their previous attempt, worried that another failure might put them under further suspicion. But now, with Musa seemingly out of the picture, Kunal thought they should try once more. "We can't just keep waiting, Chioma," he said gently. "The teachers clearly aren't going to help, and we've already tried everything else." Chioma nodded, feeling a familiar pang of anxiety at the thought of her mother's dismissive voice on the other end of the line. But she knew Kunal was right. Her parents were her only way out of this situation. They waited until the early evening, when most of the boys were busy with their activities. Then, under the cover of the steady rainfall, they slipped down the corridor toward the office. Kunal kept a lookout while Chioma picked up the receiver, her hands shaking slightly as she dialed her mother's number. The phone rang once, twice, then finally her mother's voice crackled on the other end. "Hello." Chioma's heart skipped a beat. "Mama, it's me." "Chioma." "Oh, Chioma. How are you? Are you settling in?" Her mother's voice was as calm and distant as ever, not a trace of concern in her tone. Chioma took a deep breath. "Mama, I've been trying to tell you. I'm not in the right school. You enrolled me in an all-boys boarding school. I've been pretending to be a boy this whole time." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Chioma could almost picture her mother's confused expression, trying to process what she was hearing. Finally, her mother spoke, her voice hesitant. "Chioma, are you sure? That can't be right. Your father filled out all the forms carefully." "I'm sure, Mama," Chioma insisted, her voice rising with desperation. "I'm the only girl here. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up." Her mother sighed, sounding more irritated than concerned. "Chioma, you know we're both busy, and I don't have time for drama. We already paid the fees. Just try to make the best of it, and we'll see what we can do next term." Chioma's heart sank. "Mama, please, I can't keep pretending. It's dangerous." But her mother only sighed again. "We'll talk about it when you come home for break. I really don't have time for this right now." The line went dead, and Chioma slowly lowered the receiver, feeling tears sting her eyes. Kunnel touched her shoulder, looking at her with concern. "Did she understand?" he asked softly. Chioma shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. "She didn't believe me. She thinks I'm just being difficult." Kunnel's face fell, but he quickly tried to reassure her. "Then we'll figure something else out. You don't have to go through this alone, Chioma. I'm here with you, and I'm not going anywhere." She managed a small, grateful smile, though the pain in her chest was almost overwhelming. Her own parents didn't believe her. She was truly on her own. The next day, Chioma tried to throw herself into the routine, hoping it would take her mind off her failed phone call. She focused on her classes, sat with Kunnel at meals, and pretended everything was fine. She even joined in on the jokes and laughter, surprising herself with how normal things seemed to feel now. But she couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking on thin ice. All it would take was one slip-up, one careless moment, and her secret would be out. And if that happened, she would lose everything she had fought so hard to build here. That evening, as they were finishing their homework in the dorm, Kunnel suddenly looked up, his face pale. "Chioma, do you smell smoke?" Chioma sniffed the air, her heart skipping a beat as she caught the faint, acrid scent of burning. "Yes, I think it's coming from outside." They exchanged a worried glance and hurried out of the dorm, following the smell down the corridor. As they rounded the corner, they saw smoke wafting out of an empty classroom, and to their horror, they saw Musa standing there, smirking as he held a small lighter in his hand. What are you doing?" Chioma stammered, shock and anger flooding her. Musa's smirk widened. "Just teaching you a lesson, little Miss Know-it-all. You think you can stand up to me, embarrass me in front of everyone? You're going to regret that." Kunnel stepped forward, his fists clenched. "You've gone too far, Musa. The teachers are going to find out about this." Musa's expression twisted with rage. "Oh, are they? Maybe I'll tell them about Chioma's little secret first." Imagine how they'd react if they knew they'd been tricked by a girl all this time. Chioma's heart sank. She knew that if Musa exposed her, her life here would be over. But she couldn't let him get away with this either. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm. "Musa, if you tell them, you'll be in just as much trouble," she said, her voice steady. "They'll find out about all the bullying, the threats, and now this, starting a fire in the school. Do you really want that?" For a moment, Musa looked uncertain, but his smirk quickly returned, and he held up the lighter, flicking it threateningly. "I'd be more worried about yourself if I were you. You're the one who's going to pay for this, not me." Before Chioma could respond, they heard footsteps approaching. Musa's face twisted with panic, and he quickly shoved the lighter into his pocket, glaring at Chioma one last time before slipping down the hallway. Moments later, Mr. Alade appeared, his face filled with concern as he noticed the lingering smoke. "What's going on here?" "Chioma, Kunnel, what happened?" Kunnel hesitated, glancing at Chioma. She could see the question in his eyes. Should they tell the truth? Should they expose Musa and risk everything? But before she could decide, Musa's voice rang out from behind them. "I saw everything, sir," he said, sounding breathless and innocent. They were playing around with matches in the classroom. Chioma's jaw dropped in disbelief. "That's not true. Musa was the one with the lighter. He was trying to start a fire." Musa feigned a look of shock. "Me? Why would I do that? I would never endanger the school like that." "They're lying, sir." Mr. Alade's face darkened as he looked from Chioma to Kunnel to Musa, trying to piece together the truth. Chioma's heart pounded as she met Mr. Alade's gaze, silently pleading with him to believe her. But Mr. Alade sighed, looking weary and conflicted. "This is a serious accusation, Chioma. I'll have to report this to the headmaster. All three of you will come with me." The headmaster's office was cold and intimidating, with walls lined with books and a large wooden desk at the center. The headmaster, a stern, gray-haired man, sat behind the desk, his expression unreadable as he listened to their accounts of the incident. Musa maintained his innocent act, insisting that Chioma and Kunal had been the ones responsible for the smoke. Chioma could feel her anger boiling over as he lied, but she knew she had to stay calm if she wanted any chance of being believed. "Sir," Chioma said, her voice steady, "Kunal and I have been trying to stop Musa from bullying other students for weeks. We have recordings of him threatening and harassing us. We even showed them to Mr. Alade, but nothing was done." The headmaster's expression softened slightly, but he looked over at Mr. Alade, who nodded hesitantly. "Yes, headmaster, I did see the recordings, but we believed that Musa deserved another chance to improve his behavior." Chioma's heart sank. She had hoped that Mr. Alade would support her, but it seemed that even he was hesitant to speak out against Musa directly. The headmaster sighed, glancing from Chioma to Musa. "This is a very serious matter. Musa, if what Chioma is saying is true, there will be consequences." Musa's expression hardened, but he quickly covered it with a polite smile. "I understand, sir, but I assure you, I would never do anything to harm the school." The headmaster hesitated, then turned back to Chioma. "Chioma, I have received a report that you may have misled us regarding your identity. Is there something you'd like to tell me?" Chioma's heart pounded. She knew this was it, the moment when her secret could come out. She took a deep breath, glancing at Kunal, who nodded encouragingly. "Yes, sir," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "There was a mistake on my admission forms. I was enrolled here by accident. I'm a girl." The room went silent. The headmaster's eyes widened in shock, and even Mr. Alade looked stunned. Musa's smirk grew wider, his eyes gleaming with triumph. "A girl," the headmaster repeated, his voice filled with disbelief. "This is highly irregular, Chioma. Why didn't you report this sooner?" "I tried to contact my parents," Chioma said, her voice shaking, "but they didn't believe me. I didn't have anywhere else to go, so I did my best to fit in. I never meant to cause any trouble." The headmaster leaned back in his chair, looking conflicted. "This is a very unusual situation. I will need to discuss this with the board and decide how to proceed." Chioma felt her heart sink. She had finally revealed her secret, but instead of feeling relief, she felt only dread. She had no idea what would happen next, or if she would even be allowed to stay at the school. As they were dismissed from the office, Chioma felt Kunal's comforting hand on her shoulder. She had lost so much, but at least she still had his friendship. And as they walked back to their dorm, she realized that, no matter what the future held, she had taken control of her own story. She had stood up to Musa, she had revealed her truth, and she had done it all with courage. And whatever came next, she knew she would face it with the same strength that had carried her this far. The next few days passed in a blur of uncertainty and worry for Chioma. Ever since her admission to the headmaster about her true identity, a tense silence had settled over her life at St. Augustine's. She couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, not just by the other students but by the teachers as well, who had heard whispers about her deception. Kunal stayed close by her side, a constant source of comfort and reassurance. He was the only one who had been there for her through every twist and turn of her journey. But even he couldn't hide his concern about what might happen next. Chioma had taken a big risk by revealing her secret, and they both knew it could mean the end of her time at St. Augustine's. One afternoon, while she was trying to focus on her homework, the knock she had been dreading finally came. A teacher appeared in the doorway, clearing his throat. "Chioma, the headmaster would like to see you in his office." "Now!" Chioma's heart skipped a beat. She exchanged a quick glance with Kunal, who gave her an encouraging nod. "Whatever happens, I'm here for you," he whispered. Chioma forced a small smile, then stood up and followed the teacher out of the dorm. The walk to the headmaster's office felt like an eternity, her footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. When she finally reached the office, she took a deep breath and stepped inside. The headmaster sat behind his desk, his face serious but not unkind. Sitting beside him were two other figures, her parents. Chioma's breath caught in her throat as she saw them. She hadn't expected them to come so soon, and judging by the looks on their faces, they were still processing everything they had just learned. "Chioma," her father began, his voice gentle but firm. "The headmaster called us to discuss the situation here. We had no idea things had gotten this complicated." Chioma felt her cheeks flush with a mix of relief and frustration. Finally, her parents were here, forced to face the truth that she had been struggling to make them understand for so long. Her mother shifted uncomfortably, looking at the headmaster. "We just thought, well, we thought she was exaggerating. We didn't realize it was so serious." The headmaster leaned forward, his gaze softening as he addressed Chioma. "Chioma, I know this situation hasn't been easy for you. I've spoken with your parents, and they now understand the difficulties you've faced. It's clear that there was a mistake in the enrollment process, and we're committed to making things right." Chioma nodded, though she couldn't find any words. She felt like a weight had been lifted, but at the same time, she couldn't ignore the sadness that lingered in her heart. Despite everything, she had made friends here. She had grown stronger, learned to stand up for herself, and found a true ally in Kunal. Her father cleared his throat, looking at her with a mixture of regret and pride. "Chioma, we're so sorry that we didn't listen to you. We should have been more attentive. If you want to leave St. Augustine's, we'll arrange for you to transfer to another school immediately." The room fell silent as her parents and the headmaster waited for her response. Chioma took a deep breath, feeling a surge of courage. I do want to go to a school where I can just be myself," she began slowly, choosing her words carefully. "But I've learned so much here. I've made friends who treated me like family. And, well, I think I'll miss it." The headmaster gave her an understanding nod. "You've shown remarkable bravery, Chioma. I understand if you feel conflicted, but given the situation, it's best for you to move to a place where you can learn and grow without having to hide who you are." Chioma looked down, a bittersweet feeling washing over her. She knew he was right. She couldn't stay here forever, pretending to be someone she wasn't. But leaving meant saying goodbye to the life she had built, to Kunal and the boys who had started to accept her as one of their own. Her mother placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "We're proud of you, Chioma. You've shown such strength, and we'll find a school where you can truly thrive." With that, the headmaster nodded, signaling that the meeting was over. Chioma's parents rose, thanking the headmaster for his understanding. Chioma stood as well, feeling a mixture of sadness and relief. As they walked out of the office, she cast one last glance around the halls of St. Augustine's, knowing this would be one of her final memories here. When she returned to the dorm, Kunal was waiting anxiously by the door. The moment he saw her face, his expression softened with understanding. "You're leaving, aren't you?" he asked quietly. Chioma nodded, trying to keep her voice steady. "My parents are taking me to another school. The headmaster thinks it's for the best." Kunal nodded, sadness flickering in his eyes. "I figured this day would come. I just didn't think it would be so soon." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of everything they'd been through together hanging heavy in the air. Finally, Kunal spoke, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm really going to miss you, Chioma. You're the bravest person I know." Chioma smiled, feeling tears prick at her eyes. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, Kunal. You were the one person who made me feel like I belonged." Kunal gave her a small, lopsided smile. "Well, if you ever need a friend, you know where to find me." They spent the rest of the afternoon packing up her things, talking and laughing as they relived their memories together. For a little while, it felt like things were normal, like Chioma wasn't about to leave. But eventually, the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the room, and they both knew that their time was running out. As they walked out of the dorm for the last time, Chioma felt a strange sense of peace. She had faced her fears, stood up to her enemies, and found a true friend in Kunal. She had learned more about herself than she ever thought possible, and she knew she was stronger for it. Outside, Chioma's parents were waiting by the car. Her mother gave her a small, apologetic smile, and her father placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Are you ready, Chioma?" Chioma nodded, but before getting in, she turned to Kunal one last time. "Goodbye, Kunal," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Kunal nodded, his eyes shining with pride. "Goodbye, Chioma. I'll never forget you." With one last, lingering look, Chioma climbed into the car. As they drove away, she watched the school disappear behind her, feeling a mixture of sadness and hope. She knew she was leaving behind a chapter of her life that had shaped her in ways she would never forget. But as she looked out the window, she felt a new sense of freedom. For the first time, she could go to a school where she could be herself, where she didn't have to hide or pretend. And she knew, deep down, that she had the strength to face whatever challenges lay ahead. A few days later, Chioma started at her new school, a mixed-gender school closer to home. She was nervous at first, wondering if she would find friends as loyal as Kunal. But the lessons she'd learned at St. Augustine's stayed with her. She carried herself with a newfound confidence, unafraid to stand up for herself and for others. In her new classes, she quickly made friends who appreciated her honesty and bravery. And whenever she faced a difficult moment, she thought of Kunal's quiet support and the strength she had found at St. Augustine's. Months passed, and life settled into a comfortable rhythm. She still wrote to Kunal, sharing stories and updates from her new school, and he replied with tales of the boys' latest adventures. They promised to stay in touch, to never forget the bond they had formed. And even though Chioma had left St. Augustine's, she knew a part of her would always carry those memories with her. She was no longer the scared, uncertain girl who had arrived there by mistake. She was someone who had faced her fears, fought for her place, and found her voice. She was Chioma, strong, brave, and ready for whatever lay ahead. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Write what you learned in the comments below. Here is another interesting story to watch. Click to watch now.